They didn't just steal your innocence. They rewrote your code. Before you ever touched lust, lust touched you, not with images, but with absence. Not with sin, but with silence. The enemy's most dangerous weapon isn't the sin itself, it's the setup. A father who never looked you in the eyes, a mother too broken to notice your pain, a house filled with noise, yet completely void of love. That's where the enemy begins, not in adulthood but in infancy. While your spirit was still soft, he carved lies into your soul with surgical precision. You didn't wake up addicted. You were trained, programmed, to find comfort in counterfeit love. Every ignored tear, every unmet need, every shameful silence. It wasn't just trauma, it was spiritual engineering. And when you finally stumbled upon that forbidden image, or that first secret act, it didn't feel evil, it felt familiar. Because it wasn't just about pleasure, it was about pain, disguised. This is deeper than temptation. It's ancient, it's generational. And unless you confront the original wound, you'll keep fighting the wrong war. Because lust isn't your enemy. The lie behind it is the war you didn't know you were born into. You didn't stumble into lust. You were born into a battlefield. Before you ever knew what sin was, a war had already begun over your soul. Not a war fought with guns or armies, but one waged in silence, shadows and suggestion. The enemy didn't come roaring into your life with horns and fire. He came quietly, through the cracks in your home, the wounds in your family, and the unspoken voids that no one ever acknowledged. Most people think temptation begins when you first feel desire. But desire was never the beginning. The setup was. The enemy knew he couldn't destroy you outright, so he devised a longer game, corrupt the foundation, twist the blueprint, poison the root. Because if he could plant the right lies early enough, you would spend the rest of your life acting them out and calling it personality, addiction or weakness. You weren't just hurt, you were programmed. Every time your father failed to affirm you, every time your mother dismissed your emotions, every time you cried alone in a room where love should have answered, a seed was planted, a seed of abandonment, of insecurity, of unworthiness. And those seeds didn't vanish with age. They grew silently underground, until lust found them. You see, lust is not the first step in rebellion. It's the result of a strategy. It's the comfort you reach for when love feels foreign. And the enemy knows this. That's why he doesn't just tempt you. He prepares you. From childhood, he uses neglect as a weapon. He uses silence as a teacher. He makes you question your value before you've even had a chance to define it. That's how the war begins. Not with images on a screen, but with emptiness in the soul. Not with rebellion, but with need. And when those needs aren't met by God's design, we turn to counterfeits. That's the war. The enemy doesn't need to drag you to hell. He just needs to disconnect you from who you really are. A child of divine design. A soul forged with eternal purpose. And the more you forget that, the easier it is to fall for substitutes. Think about it. The world teaches us to chase pleasure. But what if that craving for pleasure is really a craving for presence? The presence of a father who was never there. The presence of love that was never modeled. What if lust isn't about sex at all, but about wounds? The enemy has always feared your awakening. That's why he fought so hard to confuse you before you could speak, to distract you before you could fight, to wound you before you could walk in power. But make no mistake, the war is real. You were born into it. And now that you see it, you don't get to pretend it isn't there. Wounds become instructions and pain becomes programming. Pain doesn't just hurt, it teaches. And if no one is there to correct the lesson, the wound becomes a lifelong script you act out on repeat. As a child, you didn't interpret your trauma as abuse. You internalized it as identity. If your father abandoned you, you didn't conclude he was broken. You believed you were unlovable. If your mother emotionally neglected you, you didn't think she lacked capacity. You assumed you didn't deserve affection. These weren't just sad moments. They were spiritual downloads. Your heart was forming its blueprint for how love works, how the world treats you and what you're worth. And the enemy made sure that blueprint was cracked from the start. This is how demons operate. They don't just attack your behavior, they twist your beliefs. They know the deepest prison isn't around your body, it's inside your identity. So by the time lust enters the picture, it doesn't show up as a red flag. It shows up as relief, as comfort, as control. You don't run to it because you're perverse. You run to it because you were programmed to seek intimacy without vulnerability, connection without the risk of rejection, pleasure without the pain of love. You were taught by pain that real love leaves. So your brain started chasing the next best thing, the illusion of love, lust. And that's where the enemy cements his work. Because every time you obey that urge, every time you hide behind that screen or escape into that fantasy, the wound says, see, this is all you'll ever be. And that thought becomes code, reinforcing the very program the enemy installed when you were too young to fight back. Your pain becomes prophecy. Without healing, you begin to live as if the lie is true. You attract people who affirm it. You self-sabotage when real love comes. You isolate when you need connection. You feel strong when you're actually enslaved. And the enemy stays silent because he doesn't need to speak anymore. The voice inside your head is doing his work for him. But here's the truth that breaks chains. You were never the wound. You were never the lie. You were the battleground. What happened to you wasn't a verdict. It was a violation. And it's not your shame to carry. When you see this, really see it, you begin to take your story back from the hands that twisted it. You stop playing out the script written by pain and start letting God rewrite the narrative. Lust is not the root, it's the symptom. The infection is deeper. But once you expose the programming, once you stare at the wound and declare you don't define me anymore, that's when freedom begins. Not when you resist the behavior, but when you renounce the belief behind it. Fifth, lust is the demon's language of false love. Lust doesn't knock on your door in the middle of the night and say, I'm here to destroy your destiny. It comes softly, sweet. It dresses itself as love. It speaks your language, your wounds, your loneliness, your unspoken ache for intimacy, and then offers a counterfeit version of everything your soul truly needs. That's what makes it dangerous. Lust doesn't fight you with fear. It seduces you with familiarity. The enemy knows if he can't kill the soul, he'll feed it sugar until it dies slowly. That's what lust is, spiritual sugar. It gives you a rush, a high, a momentary feeling of being wanted, powerful, filled, but then it leaves you emptier than before. You don't just crave sex, you crave to be seen, to be held, to be understood. But lust never delivers love, only the illusion of it. And that illusion is where demons hide. Demons don't care about your body, they want your identity. And lust is one of their most effective tools to hijack it. Each indulgence is like signing a silent contract. This is who I am now, you whisper to yourself after another fall. But that's a lie. That's the enemy speaking. Lust wants to convince you that your desires define you, that your urges are unchangeable, and that holiness is for someone else. But here's the truth. Lust is not about love. It's about control. It controls how you see others, reducing sacred souls into objects of consumption. It controls how you see yourself, making you feel like you're nothing more than your urge. It controls your spirit, draining your confidence, your clarity, your connection with God. And it grows in silence, because lust thrives in isolation. The enemy wants you quiet, ashamed, locked in a cycle of secrecy. Why? Because confession breaks curses. Exposure kills the parasite. But as long as you hide, it feeds. Understand this. Lust doesn't just seek to distract you. It seeks to displace love. It takes the place where real intimacy was meant to dwell and fills it with fantasy. It takes what was meant to be sacred, desire, touch, longing, and distorts it. What began as a longing for divine connection becomes a cycle of destruction. That's why every act of lust feels so personal. It is. You're not just betraying a rule, you're betraying your design. You were made to love in truth, not escape into lie. And every time you run to lust, you're not feeding desire, you're feeding deception. The good news, you can starve it. You can reject the lie. But first, you must see lust for what it really is. Not love, not intimacy, not freedom, but a language of demons, speaking to your deepest wounds in the voice of false comfort. In gateways, eyes, silence, and screens. The enemy doesn't kick down the door, he slides in through the cracks. And the first cracks are always gateways. 3 of them: your eyes, your silence, and your screens. First, the eyes. What you see, you remember. What you behold, you become. The enemy knows that the eye is the lamp of the body, so he bombards you with images not just to arouse, but to infect. That first exposure to something pornographic or perverse wasn't just accidental. It was a seed planted in sacred ground. For a child, even a single image becomes a blueprint. The brain doesn't just store the picture, the soul interprets it. This is pleasure. This is intimacy. This is what makes the pain go away. From then on, you begin searching not for love, but for more images, more illusions. Then comes silence. Homes that never talk about pain breed pain. When no one explains what's happening inside your body, your thoughts, your urges, shame moves in to teach you instead. Parents avoid the topic. Churches ignore it. So you grow up in spiritual silence, and that silence becomes permission. You keep everything hidden. You learn early that emotions are not to be expressed. They are to be buried. And what gets buried doesn't die. It mutates. Finally, the screens. Phones, laptops, TVs. These aren't just entertainment devices. They're altars. Places where offerings are made daily. Time, attention, innocence. The screen becomes the priest of a dark religion. Every scroll, every click, every swipe. It's forming you, teaching you, shaping your desires. It doesn't even need to show nudity anymore. Lust is subtle now. TikTok thirst traps, suggestive movie scenes, Instagram bodies. You're being discipled by images, discipled by algorithms. And because it feels so normal, you forget it's spiritual. Combine these three: visual input, emotional silence, and digital exposure, and you don't get rebellion, you get programming. The enemy isn't just tempting you, he's training you. If you want freedom, you can't just resist lust. You have to close the gates, guard your eyes like they're sacred, break the silence and bring your shame into the light. Reclaim your screen time and turn it into worship, not war. You weren't meant to be a slave to the enemy's system. You were born to rewrite it. 5. When comfort becomes the cage, lust doesn't come dressed as evil. It arrives clothed in comfort, in relief, in escape. It whispers, "This is how you survive," and for a time it works. You feel better, numb, distracted, detached from the storm inside. But what begins as comfort becomes a cage so subtle, so quiet, that you don't even hear it locked behind you. You never chose lust because you wanted filth. You chose it because something inside you was bleeding. You were reaching for warmth in a cold world. You didn't want to rebel. You wanted to feel something, or feel nothing at all. And lust was right there, offering both. The thrill, the release, the illusion of control. But here's the truth. Every time you run to lust, you teach your soul to hide instead of heal. It becomes your medication, your pattern, your prison. And slowly it rewires you. The enemy doesn't need you addicted to pornography. He needs you addicted to escaping your pain. That's the real trap, because once lust becomes your comfort zone, freedom starts to feel like pain. Purity feels unnatural. Real intimacy feels threatening. You crave what's killing you because it feels safe, and you fear what could save you because it feels foreign. The cage is built from repetition. Each act reinforces the lie. You'll never be enough. You'll never be free. This is just who you are. And over time you stop resisting, you stop hoping, you stop praying bold prayer, because when your comfort is your cage, you forget what it feels like to live outside of it. But hear this, your craving for lust is not your weakness. It's evidence that your soul still remembers what true love feels like. Lust is the counterfeit, the enemy's twisted version of what your heart truly longs for. You don't need more willpower, you need healing. You need to go back to the wound, to the root, to the moment the lie was planted, because until you do, no amount of self-discipline will free you from a cage you secretly find comfort in. The devil doesn't need chains if he can convince you the cage is home, but you were never meant to live there. You were made to break it. 6. The generational curse masquerading as choice. You think you're making your own decisions, that when you fall into lust, it's just weakness, temptation, a personal failure. But what if I told you it wasn't your choice at all? What if the war you're losing didn't start with you, but with your father, and his father before him? Lust often enters your life not through rebellion, but through inheritance. This is the generational curse masquerading as personal choice, and it's the enemy's oldest trick. Look close, the patterns are there. A grandfather with hidden addictions, a father emotionally distant or sexually broken, a family line full of secrecy, shame, silence. And in the middle of it, You thinking this is just your private struggle, when in truth you're carrying the weight of unbroken covenants made long before you were born. The enemy doesn't need to tempt you with something new if your bloodline is already contaminated. He just keeps handing down the same chains, one generation at a time, and if you don't break it, you'll pass it. This is why the fight feels so much bigger than your willpower, because it is. You're not just resisting lust, you're wrestling a curse that lives in cycles: exposure, addiction, shame, secrecy, repeat, over and over, until someone rises with enough awareness and spiritual violence to say, this ends with me. And no, this curse doesn't always look demonic in the obvious sense. Sometimes it wears a smile, sometimes it's normalized. Boys will be boys. At least he's not hurting anyone. These phrases are not harmless. They are protective spells over demonic systems. They excuse bondage. They let demons build thrones in family homes. But here's the truth. What your father didn't heal, you must face. And if you don't, your sons will. You were not born to repeat patterns. You were born to rewrite them. The curse only survives in silence, but the moment you confront it, name it, fight it, pray against it, you rip up the script. The enemy's been passing down like an inheritance of chains. You are not a slave to lust. You are a warrior, sent to destroy what destroyed your bloodline. And the curse dies with you. The holy resistance, when heaven remembers who you are, there comes a moment, quiet, haunting, and divine, when the chains no longer feel like comfort, and the silence becomes unbearable. That's when something ancient begins to stir within you. Not rebellion, remembrance. Lust was never about desire. It was about forgetting. Forgetting who you were before the world touched you, before the wound, before the pattern, before the program. The enemy knew that if he could keep you trapped in cycles of pleasure and shame, you would eventually forget you were royal. But heaven never forgot. You were not created to chase shadows and secret screens. You were crafted in the image of divine fire, the kind that burns through lies, illusions, and inherited curses. The moment you begin to resist isn't weakness, it's war. The shaking, the trembling, the guilt that breaks you, that's not failure. That's resistance forming in your spirit. This is the holy resistance, when you stop running from pain and start walking into truth, when you choose prayer over pleasure, when you fast not to prove yourself, but to break what's been feeding on your soul. The resistance isn't loud. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like deleting what no one knows you saved. Sometimes it's crying out at 3 a.m., begging God to rewire your brain. Sometimes it's choosing the long road of healing over the quick fix of lust. The enemy doesn't panic when you feel bad. He panics when you wake up, because now you're dangerous. Now you're remembering. And when a man remembers who he is in heaven's eyes, every demon assigned to him begins to lose its grip. This isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware. Lust thrives in forgetfulness, but resistance is born when you remember that you are not your urges, not your past, not your programming. You are a son of the Most High. And every time you choose truth over temptation, you are not just breaking a habit, you are breaking a bloodline curse. Heaven is not just waiting for your repentance, it's rallying behind your resistance. Angels draw swords when you take a stand, and your tears, they are holy, they are weapons. Because when you remember who you are, hell remembers who you were always meant to be. 8. Deliverance is a sword, not a soft word. Deliverance doesn't come wrapped in soft sermons and gentle affirmations. It comes like a sword, sharp, divisive, and unapologetically violent to everything hell has planted inside you. Because lust isn't just a bad habit. It's a spiritual contract. Every time you gave in, something gave up. Your authority, your clarity, your self-respect. And you thought repentance was enough. You thought whispering, God forgive me, would erase years of demonic programming. But real deliverance isn't quiet. It's war. It's ugly. It's you on your knees, coughing up the filth you let live in your soul for far too long. You can't just pray your way out of bondage. You have to fight. That means breaking every altar in your life where lust was worshipped. The secret apps, the late night habits, the innocent social media scrolls that feed the demon you say you're trying to kill. That means fasting when your flesh is screaming. That means speaking scripture when your mind is flooded with images. That means crying out when shame tells you to shut up. Lust doesn't die politely. It dies painfully, and deliverance doesn't feel like floating. It feels like fire. The reason many never get free is because they want God to heal what they refuse to amputate. But you can't cuddle demons and then cry when they devour you. You have to drive them out. Speak to them, bind them, cast them. You have to hate what once felt good. You have to rage against what once gave you comfort, because what comforted your flesh was killing your spirit. Jesus said, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. That sword divides the old you from the new, and when you grip it, you stop being a victim and become a warrior. The truth is, deliverance is violent because demons don't leave gently. They leave screaming. They leave fighting, but they will leave when you stop playing church and start waging war. And in that battlefield, in the sweat, the tears, the brokenness, you'll find a version of yourself that lust could never touch. Not soft, not fragile, but free. The enemy didn't just want to tempt you, he wanted to shape you, to carve an identity from your pain, to teach you that desire equals worth, that shame equals truth, and that your body was nothing more than a battlefield for cravings too powerful to resist. But that's the lie. That's always been the lie. You were never meant to be owned by urges. You were never built to be defined by what you crave. You were created in the image of God, not a beast bound by instinct, but a spirit wrapped in glory, a son of eternity, a daughter of divinity. And the war you're in right now, it's not proof that you're broken. It's proof that you're awakening. The fact that you're even watching this, the fact that your spirit is restless, that your heart feels torn open with conviction, that's not weakness. That's evidence of life. That's the sound of chains rattling. That's the scream of demons realizing their eviction notice has been served. Yes, your childhood was invaded. Yes, your innocence was robbed. But here's the holy truth. The same place where you were wounded is the same place God will weaponize. The same eyes that were trained to lust can be retrained to see purity. The same hands that sinned in silence can now be lifted in surrender. The same mouth that whispered guilt can now declare in prayer. Freedom is not a fantasy, it's a fight. And if you're waiting to feel free before you fight, the enemy will keep you sedated in spiritual chains. You don't fight after you're delivered, you fight to be delivered. It's time to shut the doors, time to delete the secret escapes, time to unfollow the temptation, time to confront the lie that says this is just who I am. Because no, this isn't who you are. This is who the enemy programmed you to be. But now you see it, now you know, and now you choose. You can either repeat what broke you, or you can rise and break what tried to own you. You can stay the product of pain, or you can become the prophecy your bloodline's been waiting for, the warrior, the chain breaker, the curse ender. Deliverance doesn't begin with a preacher, it begins with your decision to stop agreeing with your wounds and start aligning with your worth. You are not too far gone. You are not too deep in. You are not disqualified. You are dangerous to the darkness. And when you finally pick up the sword, you'll realize the enemy's greatest fear wasn't your sin, it was your freedom. Now take it back.